Hey everyone, I'm Nate Boutwarden, and recently I attended a 2 day session of a mixing course with Jordan Valeriote. And I'll get into who Jordan is and why this was important for and to me. But what I wanted to really talk about here is how the 2 days were planned, how everything worked out really well, and how I learned a ton from the process. So, getting into it, I want to state something really clear up front. I'm not employed by Jordan, I'm not part of Black Salt Audio, and I don't have any financial motivation for making the video. I'm just telling you a story. So, that's where our starting point is. So, who's Jordan? Like, Jordan, in terms of YouTube in particular, and how to mix music and how to make music and the kind of traps you fall into where, when you're trying to make music that you want to make, he's really brought things into focus. He's a highly experienced music producer, as I've noted here, bands like Silverstein, etc. He's based in Toronto, Canada. And the thing that I'll dig into as I go is like he specializes in rock and metal, and that's really my musical point of view as well. And I'll talk about why that's important with that alignment in a little bit. Now, I hate that this is a PowerPoint kind of presentation. That's not really what I wanted to do. However, I wanted to talk in earnest about why this worked. And I also wanted to sing praises of Jordan and of the other people who attended the audio mixing course. I'm calling it a course over the course of 2 intense days in Toronto, Canada. Jordan has been on YouTube forever. He came onto my radar screen about 5, 6 years ago. I think it was like pre pandemic or when things got gnarly when we had to kind of shelter in place. What he brought to me initially was I had stopped watching TV because I'm like, look, I can watch the news, that's depressing. I can watch cooking shows, which became repetitive. I can drink a bunch of alcohol, which was not healthy. And I started really working on my own music again, like in earnest. And he had presented this session around how do I deal with chuggy guitars, meaning the palm mute's like a how do I make that aligned with an open played distorted guitar? And that was the starting point with Jordan. So I started watching a ton of his videos and it started helping me refocus. And I'll talk about Jordan more as we go. But also, one of the things that's kind of forgotten here, or might be forgotten here, is that he actually was a founder, or is the founder and leader of this company called Black Salt Audio. And for me, I've always used the Waves SSL plugin. Again, I'm not compensated for mentioning things like this, but he made a workflow a lot more simple. And I want to talk about the workflow as we go, because when you mix, in particular, in the case of this 2 day session, it's really hard to mix two songs in 2 days and to do so with a level of attention. And using plugin chains where you have to readjust for every mix is also a challenge. And I'll talk about my learnings, which really fits into what I'm telling you here. So the course was about the following. And one thing I want to mention, going back to what I mentioned around strong YouTube presence, is that I signed up for, I forgot what around Jordan, but I would get I still get constant updates around various tips and tricks. And one of these things that came out of this is, hey, I'm doing a 2 day course in Toronto. If you want to sign up, let me know. And so I started getting information around the course. And so as you get more materials around the course, what you get is effectively Jordan's going to spend 2 days mixing songs. And depending on, there were 2 levels for the course. I'm not going to get into what those were. You could have him spend a day mixing your song, or for some of the other folks who are in the session, you could have him provide recommendations. And I'm going to talk about how both of these workflows really worked. I want to show you the start and end product of a song that he mixed for me. And I also want to talk about his workflow and how it relates to what he's presented on YouTube and why it's super valuable. Again, not being compensated. I'm just a guy who took a course, and I'm really glad that I did. We also went to the studio in Toronto because Jordan, as noted before, is based in Toronto, Canada. And one of the interesting parts of this was that we worked on an SSL 4K. The last time I worked on a 4K was literally 21 years ago. I have not touched a desk like that in 21 years. And NS10s, which are studio monitors for those who don't know, are really specific. Some people love them, some people hate them. But it presented a really interesting opportunity to reevaluate mixes. And then you'll see the pictures as I work through this. A ton of amazing vintage analog gear, like original Pultecs and 1176s and L2As and L3As and other gear that we could patch into the SSL 4K, and that was great. But finally, and Jordan's probably going to watch this and be like, oh my God, I didn't offer dispelling myths about gear and analog and mixing, but I learned certain things about myself through this and how I'd kind of fallen into some traps around how I mix, and a bunch of analog mix kind of lore on the internet were dispelled throughout the course of 2 days. So I want to talk about that. That's not a Jordan thing, but I bring this up only because it's an observation of these 2 days that were well spent. So initially, as I had mentioned, Jordan has a really great marketing campaign around everything he does. Maybe you come in through his mixing cheat sheet. Maybe you've subscribed to his channel. I mean, there's a bunch of reasons why people have aligned themselves, at least virtually, with Jordan. I got this email, and it was probably like 6 weeks ago, maybe 2 months ago. I kind of forget exactly when it came in. And what the course gave was a bunch of things where I had to really sit down and think about it. And one of the options was to have 2 days of intensive mixing with Jordan, and he'll make mix suggestions in certain cases, and I'll dig into that a bit. But the short of it is that if you had a mix, whether it's yours or someone else's, where you really want them to mix in real time and answer questions, that was an option. Or if you have other things where you want them to weigh in and you take notes, that was another option. The big thing with the course that I really liked was, and I'll talk about why I chose to do this around Jordan specifically in like 2-3 minutes. You get a chance to interact with Jordan all throughout the day, whether it's mixing, you're sitting down for lunch, it's the end of the day, it's the morning, doesn't matter. You get the time from an expert in music production, whether it is producing, whether it is mixing, whether it is mastering, whatever. You get to ask specific questions, and he was really good at answering them, and I left the session feeling really good about it. So also, it wasn't just me. It wasn't just me and one other person. It was 5 of us. And one thing, because I self-produce, one thing that I know was kind of like a deficit of knowledge was that I did not work with people who did other types of music. I was pretty much self-contained, and I knew I needed to do something different for what I'll talk about in a moment or two. But the number of people, 5 of us, who are passionate about music, and the reason why this is important is because you'll probably listen to these songs like, or at least in parts, 200 or 300 times during the production or post-production process. And if you don't like it, this is not the thing for you. And yet I got to meet some really cool folks who do this for a living, And I'll talk about the people who were there in a little bit. I want to be clear that I'm not going to really name names. I didn't ask for permission, and I don't want to bother people around who is there and what they bring or brought to the table. Also, the course was going to have us in a studio that has a 4K. So, in at least 21 years ago, my three favorite desks are the SSL 4K, API, you name it, and the Neve. And for me, SSL is near and dear to my heart because the way you're able to produce music on the 4K is transparent to a certain degree, and it's not super aggressive in the way that you can do EQ and compression. So when I got a chance to touch a 4K again, potentially after say 21 years, I was like, all right, this is a great idea. Also, as anyone who attended this course, we got all the like perpetual licenses to all the Black Salt Audio or BSA plugins, and that's amazing because frequently when you use like iLok, and I'm not disparaging iLok or anything, you are kind of tied into this annual licensing and you have to remember to renew it, and then you're working with a client. These are anecdotes I've heard from people who actually do this for a living, and sometimes you forget, right? You're busy, it expires, and suddenly the Black Salt Audio or BSA plugins became really front and center for day two. And I'm going to break down both days. And then the second day was exclusive to full mixes with the BSA plugins because we used a bunch of chains. I'll talk about day one versus day two around that. I was pretty much a Waves SSL guy. Again, there are many other SSL itches to scratch through Universal Audio or whatever else, or Slate, etc. But what I really wanted to do on day two was, and I was excited that everyone in the group was like, yeah, I want to see this mixed exclusively with BSA. I got to see some neat stuff take place and how it would enhance the workflow of mixing. Further, it's this, right? Here is the actual 4K desk. And it was amazing because it had been so long for me to sit in front of it. But here we see like Neves, and we see the original 1176s, and you have 2As, L2As, L3As. You see all this over here, Pultecs, and all this. And this is important to mention because we had at the end of day one and day two the ability to literally use this gear. Granted, and I'll get to it in my assessment of day two, my ability to actually do this on a useful level 21 years later was not great. But I got a chance to reimagine it, and I got a chance to have this kind of dating nostalgia again, if you will. So, yeah, I mentioned how much I liked it. I really liked the session. I'm not selling you anything. I want to be clear about that. It's just here as a guy who's in his 50s, who's kind of been working in tech for a long time and who's been equally passionate about music but without the success. I wanted to see what it was about to work with people who are really good, to spend some time with Jordan, and what happened in my case, and we're going to break into Downer in my DAW of choice, the pre, which is what I made going into the session, and the post, which is what was mixed in the studio. I want to talk about why having the time with him was important because, like for me, I didn't leave it feeling positive in terms of what I had done. I realized I had a ton of shortcomings and assumptions and leaning too heavily on the internet. But at the same time, I came to understand my bad habits. And I came to understand where if you use a different chain that's not specifically SSL, you have really interesting results. And then finally, towards the end of day one, and I'll talk about day one in a moment, I heard what I made come to life. And that was this moment where I said, okay, I'm not lost at sea, but I really need to push myself harder. And I can hear this finished product that is really more to what I had in mind. Um, there were five of us in the course, and the people are really nice and really gracious. And, there were two of us out of five who have different careers. And people just want to talk about music, and you could tell how much joy they had the same way we do. But it was really the case that I love them. I love their work. I'll break down day one and day two. And I had a chance to talk to some really neat people, which also helped me kind of get over the hump because I had, as someone who self produces, technically I'm an auteur. Most of the time I play all the parts on the music that I make. It gave me this thing that I knew that I needed, and the feedback from the group of folks was amazing. Finally, what is Jordan like? Well, he's the same really as on the YouTube videos, and I mean that in a really positive way. He's very laid back. He's, and I'll talk about more of why I wanted to do this with Jordan rather than with someone else, because there are many ways to kind of have the same experience with other people who do music production and then, market that on YouTube. But when you mix a song like end to end, you start from square one, or in tech, you start from square zero. It requires a ton of attention and a ton of enthusiasm to do it end to end for like nonstop. My mix took like 6.5 hours. On day two, it took like 5.5, 6 hours, I think. And Jordan is really low key, but his enthusiasm for doing what he does was really, really infectious. And for me, it was inspiring because, doing this is hard, where you might listen to a song 200-300 times in various parts. And if you don't care for that, that's really a hard pill to swallow. So he did this consistently over 2 days and for both full mixes and mix assessment. And I never saw him be like, yeah, this is bullshit. This is a waste of my time. It's the opposite of that. He was all in. So I'm deeply appreciative. So why did I take the course? Well, I've been a musician forever. I started, I think, when I was like 9, 10 years old, learning guitar, learning how to read music and all this. And then later on, when I was, say, 16, 17, 18, 19 years old, I got into playing other people's music. Rush is one of my favorite bands. Metallica is another. Helmet's another. The Smiths are another. And I just wanted to apply myself to that. But then I wanted to, write my own tunes, go on my own path. I was on two record labels with various bands and whatever projects. I've toured and done all that stuff, but I got older, and that's, a sad reality of life. And I really wanted to do audio production because for me, music, like all or most other things, is a binary choice. Like be involved with it or don't. And I wanted to be involved with it. I still play, but for me, it is really about how do I make this music make sense, whether it's my own or someone else's. Um, Initially, and this is probably 15 years ago, my own mixes were shit. And pardon my language, but it's like you mix in the house and it doesn't matter the speakers. And I'll come back to why that is important based on my learnings here. If you do not make certain moves in your mix, you're going to keep redoing it. And that was me 15 years ago. Oh God, this sounds pretty cool in the car. And then you make incremental mixes. Then it sounds worse. You're like, wait, why does this sound worse? Because I heard it yesterday. The guitars were a little bit soft, but now there are no drums and all this kind of crap that happens when you're trying to work it out. Um, what I established about 10 years ago was I had this epiphany about kick drum, snare drum, and bass, and I prefer to use analog instruments in that domain. I was able to get really consistent mixes. I play it in my house, whether it be on my monitors, whether it be on our. I happen to use Sonos again. I'm not, endorsing Sonos or any other music solution for the home, or I play it in my car, I play it on my phone, and it was all basically the same deal. So I wanted to go to the next step. And I work in tech, as I mentioned. I want to kind of start, whether it be Fiverr or some other portal for music production, really start hitting it in a couple of years. Maybe it's two, maybe it's five. I don't know. I've been working for 30 years, so 2 or 5 years is kind of like this random way of thinking about this. But at the same time, I took the course because I know who I didn't want to work with. Even if we talk about my career in tech versus my ambitions in music, this is the first person I didn't want to work with. Like, I'm game for specific direct feedback. I do not take things personally, but at the same time, don't screw in my face. It really bugs me. And I didn't want to work with someone who's abrasive. I needed constructive feedback and structured ways of doing what we did at these sessions. Secondarily, well, yeah, there's this guy. Now, I was concerned, around someone like this, given the horns and all, that they might not be able to fit through the door of the studio and they suddenly don't show up. And there might be like these interpersonal communication issues. But at the same time, I was like, I don't actually think they understand music production. So I considered other options because Jordan's not the only person on YouTube who does marketing and who's had a path for success and teaching people. But the reason why this session resonated with me is really these things. Genre alignment is really important. I like music an awful lot, and I became obsessive about music when I was like 4 or 5 years old. My mom did not like rock music, for what it's worth. She's the one who started playing music back in the day, when hi-fi systems were kind of this furniture piece, and you play records, the literal vinyl. She liked like Neil Diamond and show tunes and all this stuff. I happen to like darker and louder music, so I didn't want to work with someone who um, is a jazzer or just pop music. It doesn't make sense. And frankly, when Jordan had reached out with a marketing campaign around this very session or these very sessions that I'm talking about, he was clear that I want to make sure you don't expect to do hip hop, and that's exactly my line of thinking. But I also didn't want to work with someone who has not actually done it. And the hard part of this is, um, you have someone who's talented, but they've only been at it for a couple of years. There's no track record, and I already know that I've got bad habits. And um, Jordan has been at it, and I'm estimating probably close to 20 years. And I think he came onto YouTube probably 10, 15, 16, 17, 18 years ago. Um, Having that experience in the room and having the ability to uh, have open questions and conversations, and it wasn't just for me, it was for the other people, even though it wasn't their song, just to say, okay, you made this EQ or compressor move or whatever you did, why'd you do it? Having that openness was important. I always liked Jordan's ability to connect with people. Like I said, the session he did on YouTube a number of years ago around chugging guitars was amazing because I think it was like a 5 minute video. He was like, "Yeah, use a multipressor, use this frequency. Oh, look, it's even now. Don't go ballistic with how you automate volume. Don't do this, don't do that." It was the simplest thing in the world, but also useful. And direct feedback. It's like, I don't care if you say something to me that bothers me. That's not me, right? What I want to is tell me where things are or aren't, and I'll get into day one where my song was mixed and concrete results. I'll play you the before and after, in my DAW of choice, and I heard something completely different in what Jordan did versus what I did, and it really captured my imagination. And honestly, between the people who attended the session and the concrete results, I I couldn't sleep on Saturday night. We started on a Saturday in Toronto, had a couple glasses of wine, couldn't fall asleep, and then finally fell asleep. And then Sunday was intense as well. And yet I had a smile on my face on Sunday. I had a smile on my face on Monday when I went home. And I'm still working through the intensity, but also the importance of the sessions with Jordan. So finally, let's get into, actually what took place in these sessions. And so I want to talk about day one. I want to talk about day two. Day one, I think I was the first one there. While I'm not seeking an award, I was kind of like, okay, cool. So, you ring the bell. We're at Noble Studios in Toronto, Canada. That's where they have the 4K and all this great gear. And I was led into a room. There's Jordan, and shakes my hand. We're chatting for a couple minutes, but he was setting up the session, so I stayed out of the way. Um, we all met, the five of us, and we did brief intros on day one. A number of folks in the session, 3 out of 5, do musicianship and or production, which was amazing. And 2 of us are passionate about making music. And I thought it was going to be incredibly awkward. It was not. It was just people who are interested in music, and as 2 days played out, that's what the thing was. Um, Jordan says after our intros, all right, we're going to work on Nate's song. And I wrote this song called Downer a number of years ago, and I've been kind of muddling through it. I'm just saying that in earnest because the song is not done still, even though I love the output of the time with Jordan and all the folks who attended. Number one thing is like Jordan has said repeatedly on his channel, don't just, take the internet things as kind of being fact, because they're not at all. Um, One thing that I struggled with in Downer, and that you'll hear in a couple minutes when I play you mine versus Jordan's, is that because one of the internet myths is that, people kind of harsh on Easy Drummer or Superior Drummer or Slate's drum program or whatever. And they're like, yeah, this is unspecial because they don't have bleed in between the drums, and to a certain extent, I used to leave it in. But that's a problem when you direct mic a bunch of drums and they have all that bleed. It Even though when you listen to, let's say you all group them together into a drum bus, that's not what gets the job done. So it's edits both for getting rid of all this stuff in the direct mics, but also it really should be on the grid. So in the case of Downers, 113 beats per minute, I'd mostly edited the drums in terms of quantizing them, but I left a lot of artifacts in, and we had to correct some things. And there was also a drum part, and I'll play it for you in the A-B comparison in a moment or two. Where Downer kind of landed was that there was just bullshit. And I'll talk about Jordan's response, and I'll talk about his level of patience around this, and I'll talk about things that I learned. Secondarily, this is an iconic album. I don't want a copyright strike. We all know what this album is. It's an iconic metal record as far as I'm concerned, but has this weird thing that people have been talking about for probably, God, is it? Yeah, it's like 35 years. It is the missing bass guitar. And I would argue this record changed the game for recording metal drums, where suddenly you get all this attack on the drums, and there are people on the internet, and I love watching their videos, who I don't know how they got the stems of this specific album. They brought in the bass, and suddenly there's bass in this record that's extremely cool. But I'm doing the opposite. And I couldn't figure out a way to make this kind of like the positive negative image. I was abusing mid range, meaning that I was like, yeah, Jordan has said repeatedly, and I agree with it because I watched this play out over 2 days. I had been cutting mid range in ways that are not useful to the song. Had I left it in and treated it very, very gently, the song would have ended up in a different space. So between the edits that he made for kick drum, snare drum, toms, it and bass, and then minor edits for guitars, and then snapping vocals into time, suddenly it was a different tune without additional processing. Mix evaluations, because we went 6 hours on day one, or 5.5 maybe. I forget the exact time at this point, but like I said, I like the people who were in the sessions, and one of the things that I think I mentioned was that when I'm the auteur, I self-produce. One of my deficiencies, and I know that I have it, is that I don't have this network of people where I listen to what they do. And the world is loaded with talented, smart, creative people. I got the very distinct benefit of meeting 5 or 4 other people outside of Jordan who do exactly that. And I loved listening to what they did. That to me was this add on that I hadn't expected. And also, when people were evaluating Downer, the mix was effectively done. But then he would say, hey, who in the room has suggestions about the song? And I'll walk you through that as I walk through the mixes. But what happened as a result of this is that all these people I hadn't met before the first session on Saturday had all these great things to say about it. And then Jordan's suggestions and the Q&A, whether it was me or someone else in the class or the course, were amazing because um, we just got a chance to really just go deep with any song, whether it be mine, whether it be day two's presenter, whether it be anyone in the course. And that was great because I heard different music, I heard a different point of view, and Jordan, and I'll go through the mix evaluation and what he did effectively as we go. Finally, at the end of day one, I don't recall how this took place. One of the interesting things, and you'll see various videos about this on YouTube as an example, is that people will say, yeah, I'm using Waves SSL, I'm using the UA SSL, I'm using the branded solid state logic SSL plugins or whatever else. And they want to do a shootout between, say, a 4K, the literal analog console that Jordan was working on, and the plugins. And I love this because I got a chance to see it for the first time in 21 years. Because if I'm correct, Waves SSL has been around maybe 15 years, give or take. And the last time, as I mentioned, on the 4K, for me, was 21 years ago. So plugins have evolved substantially, but the Waves SSL, not the EV2, but the original SSL, has been around a long time. And people patch things, and um, we got a chance to say, oh, here's the kick track on Downer. Oh, here is the kick track on the native 4K. And it was really interesting. Now, there is variance here. I'm not saying that analog is better or not. And I'll talk a little bit about some of the things we found later in day two, where, I'm not trying to pick a scab or irritate people on the internet. That's the last thing I want to do in life. But one of the kind of talk tracks you see on YouTube and Reddit and all these things is that analog is better. Well, I found several ways in which analog is a challenge. So the SSL shootout resulted in the kick drum was on point, the overheads are on point, the snare sounded better on the 4K, but there's variance always in analog. But the SSL shootout was this thing that I'd always hoped to do, and not until the session did I get a chance to be a part of it. Day two. I'm not going to talk about the person or their song specifically because the song was a cover. I don't want a copyright strike. I don't want them to get sued. I just want to talk about the nature of their song and why it was so different than what I did. Uh, what was interesting with this, because I had not heard any of the other songs going into the sessions with Jordan, was that I really liked his tracking better than mine. And technically speaking, outside of our music life, we work in tech. His level of detail of tracking it was something that I need to course correct because mine is kind of shitty in comparison, and I need to really pick that up. Um, I listened to the drums once, and then we kind of went through it again. And one of the things was program drums, and I'm not poo pooing any of this. I think he used Easy Drummer. Easy Drummer is actually pretty amazing as, you know, Superior Drummer or Slate. His program in and of itself was excellent, but at least to my ears, there are two things that I hear in program drums that I picked up on the second time. The snare is a very special drum and it doesn't capture all these overtones and the crack necessarily. And number two, the overheads were lacking some life, but that's the whole point of doing this because Jordan brought this all to life and made it all kind of useful in the mix. Number two, the guitars were not sitting in the mix, and this is really interesting because the drums were, Jordan worked on drums and bass up front, and it was sounding pretty great. We're all there nodding our heads and bobbing our heads and rocking them back and forth, which is amazing that everyone in the group shared that level of engagement. Jordan couldn't get the guitars to sit, and he went back and forth with the guy who made this. And the guy was like, "Wait, can I just give you a clean track?" Meaning there's no amps in because the guitars were using, I think they were using Neural DSP, and I forget the exact product to create this distorted tune. And they were reamped, and suddenly whatever had taken place between what had been done in their DAW and what translated into the sessions became different things. So it was really great. I love the finished product. When I talked to the person who made it through email, they're like, yeah, let's not share this. If they want to share it or whatever, they can post in comments, and I'd love for you to hear it. But it turned out really cool. So we had 2 hours left. So we took a couple of ear breaks. One of the things I liked about the 2 day course is that, you had breakfast stuff, unlimited coffee. The session was really, really well planned. There was lunch brought in, and ear breaks are a real thing. Like, I'm obsessive about music, as I mentioned, and I can mix a song for 8, 10 hours. But at some point, like if you go to see Metallica or Helmet or you name your loud band of choice, and whether you wear earplugs or not, there are going to be these artifacts, and so the next day you'll get ringing in the ears, and you can't mix music around that. So we got 2 hours at the end of day two. We took a little break, and Jordan's like, "Hey, um, there's this band I produced. They're a Canadian band, major label band, well known. I'm not going to mention the band to give him copyright strike things and all this. I'm going to play you a bit of what happened." But he's like, "Hey, do you guys?" I'm paraphrasing, but he's like, "Hey, do you want to play around with the 4K and all of this?" Let me go back to that right here. You want to play with all this stuff in the context of the mix, and no one said no. No one said no at all. So we got 2 hours to reimagine the mix. He played us the original mix. He got the tracks put into the analog 4K desk. The one thing that's interesting about the 4K, and I'm going to go back to that slide here for those who've never used the physical hardware, is that you have all these channels. Now, on the left-hand side, which I don't have a picture of, there are patch bays. That means you literally patch from this point, and up top, which is now photographed, you define effectively what buses and patches look like. The effect of this, and I'm not going to go too deep with it just for the sake of moving things forward, is here I have this thing in this channel. Could be a kick drum, a snare drum, guitar, vocals, whatever, and I need to get that through an effects send into this, like the 1176 or one of the like 2As, 3As, pull text, whatever else. And so you use a patch bay to literally, I think they were using 1/8 inch cables to uh, go from this into this, and then we took that audio output and put it into Pro Tools. So around this, then day two for me was a bit of a struggle. I was into it, but like muscle memory, as I mentioned, is a real thing. And I hadn't touched the console, I hadn't touched a desk like the 4K or really any desk in 21 years. And it's hard to do this at speed. Muscle memory is a problem because muscle memories, people like, Nate, you did this before. You should be able to rely on, what's in your memory. I'm like, yeah, my memory says here's how you do it. My actual way to do this efficiently, correctly, and competently was not great. And so, um, Joe, I forget, it might have been this guy named John in the session who wanted to take on the drums, and I'll cover how that sounds in a little bit. Um, he did a really good job with it. He knew how to do like compressor in and out, or however the buttons work on the SSL. He managed to bring the EQ in and all these things. They sounded pretty hot, if I'm being honest. One thing around the analog mix is that there were two 1176s, and one of them was great. It sounded like the reminiscence of what Waves, and again, a ton of people do this, have done with SSL and 1176 and 2As, L2As, L3s, all this is really, I, I get the nostalgia and I hear it the way that I remember it. One of the 1176s was not happy. It made this kind of crispy sound in a non cool way, but it was also different than the other 1176 because the other 1176 sounded like it should. So no matter the gain reduction or ratio you were putting into the second one, it was just like an angry little elf or beast or angry god or whatever. It was not pleasant. And a couple of the channels on the 4K, because again, everything was patched, a couple of the channels had issues. One of them, if I recall correctly, was kind of sizzly and it was imparting like static. The other one, the compressor, if I recall, was not working. The other one, the compressor was working, but was not bouncing these LEDs. So you didn't know how much gain reduction you had. So, one of the things I learned about this is like analog. I'm on board with people like analog has a special place in my heart because, all these nostalgic records and songs that I'm so enamored with are a thing. But on the other hand, I had a friend in college who had this old Oldsmobile Cutlass, and he would write notepads like we'd carpool into school. And I was like, one day I was like, dude, why are you writing this bullshit down? He was like, well, the gas gauge, and I look at it and it's always empty. So I have to keep notes and I have to maintain a certain speed. And if I maintain a certain speed and I take notes, the car won't run out of gas and I won't need to call AAA. So analog is kind of like that, and that's why I'm not completely on board with the line of thinking that analog is better just because it's analog, because the gear has its own set of limitations based on its age. 4K is a pretty old desk. Um, Finally, I was responsible for bass in the mix that I'll show you, and then the final product that came out of people just working on the 4K. Um, 3 out of the 5 of the people in our group were like all in. They were all over the 4K. 2 of us were a little more restrained. I can't speak for the second persons, kind of shying away from it, but I can only speak of this. Not confident, and I needed to relearn stuff, but I took a ton of notes around it. So let me get into the actual Studio One song. I want to start with the original. The song is called Downer. I did most of the stuff on it. My cousin drummed on it. And I had mentioned in one of the earlier slides is that when I mixed this, it sounded great. We happen to have Sonos, JBLs, and others, or other home audio systems. When I played it in both of our cars, when I played it on my phone, when I played it through monitors, when I played it in other people's houses, it was pretty consistent. But it has this thing that are series of things that I really want to talk about. And here is Jordan's mix. So as we look at these waveforms, mine does not is not hammered in the same way, and I'm not harshing on Jordan. We worked like Jordan again was tireless. I would have made a couple different choices. I still loved what he did. So what I did, just given that you can tell this is limited quite a bit, was I brought the volume of this down. So I think it's, for this, it's a Unity. This one's around like negative 3.2 dBFS. And that gives me the ability to really view them through the same lens of volume. And then here's the other tune that was done on the SSL 4K from tracks that were unprocessed. So let's get into the original Downer. I'm going to play a few seconds of it, and then I'm going to talk about a couple of neat things that were both crowdsourced from the group of people who were in the sessions, and also talk about why I would make different choices mixing going forward. So let's get into it.
Sometimes it goes trying to understand that no one knows. Sometimes I bleed. I look the other way so I can't see.
Okay, so that's my mix. And again, I stand behind what I did just from the standpoint of, 10 years ago, my mix would have sounded like college radio, where it would have been so raw and do it yourself, where I would have never attended Jordan's session at all, because that would have been embarrassing. Now, let me play Jordan's. And I really want to talk about the distinction between these two mixes, because it's very significant.
Sometimes it goes trying to understand that no one knows. Sometimes I bleed. I look the other way so I can't see.
Okay, so a couple things I want to point out like right away. Let's just bring this into console view for the moment, just so you can see these meters. I don't view mixes through the meters, but just to kind of give you this benchmark, the loudness difference is clear, right? Look at this. Look at these waveforms. Look at this. But what happens here when I toggle between the two is really, really important. So there's a completely different energy, and let's talk about that first.
Sometimes trying to understand that no one knows.
Yeah, it's like a different life, right? You went from kind of the alley into, onto the radio. And so one thing that I really liked that came out of this is when we listen to Jordan's mix, and let's give that a quick listen again. The separation, the drums have a ton of energy. And again, I had mentioned one of my shortcomings early on where I had not been editing drums properly. Yeah, I was using a gate, but I didn't really go deep with edits. And therefore, what we were hearing here is very much like in mine. There's stuff, if we just dig into this a little bit, there's stuff that's taking up space, right? And while Jordan's mix is fundamentally louder, even though I've corrected the volume just so we can do an appropriate AV or AB around, how does this work and why is this so much quote unquote louder at the same volume? Jordan made different choices. He edited half the song, and I mentioned his frustration earlier. It's not like he yelled at me. It's not like it was a bad thing. He was just very clear with me. It's like, look, man, or I believe his quote was something along the lines of, "Look, Nate, if I recommend one thing, you really have to focus on editing your tracks." And I can't say that I disagree. Jordan was totally right, because I've been working on another version of this where I did proper edits, and suddenly, holy crap balls, the track is a different thing. So that's where you get a dude who could have bought a Corvette in a session with professional audio engineers. That's the kind of crap you come across just because it's naivety. Okay, another thing I really liked with Jordan's mix in particular, when we started, uh, he asked literally, "Hey, what suggestions you have for Nate around Downer?" One of the big challenges with this is that the song, as you can tell, is 113 beats per minute. It was played with a metronome, at least for my guitar part, that I laid down as a scratch track, and then later on when I overdubbed, did bass and vocals and all this stuff. The song is boring. It's boring not because it's not well played, in my opinion. It's boring because it is literally the same throughout. And the challenge you have with it is, if you have nothing but drums that are direct for kick, snare, the four toms, you have an overhead pair, given the small room for the overheads. You have a very loud ride cymbal. You have a really nice set of hats where they project really well into the mic, the overhead mics, that is. And then you have a left-right guitar part, a lead guitar part on the right. You have a bass guitar, and you have vocals with a little bit of backgrounds. Unless all these parts are brilliant, you need to make some choices. And this stuck out at me when the group was starting to, talk through what we could do. You need to build dynamics through decisions you make in the mix. And you're like, "Nate, this is dumb AF." And I'm like, "I get you." But that's why I took this course, because it opened up this whole thing for me. So as we listen to Jordan's mix again, John had recommended, "Why don't you put in a pause right here?" So this is the pause. And let's go back a couple of measures. What he said is, here at this part, because we had a big screen, a big LED screen to look at it from anywhere in the room. He said, "Why don't you put in a pause right here?" I'm like, what pause? How much of a pause? I was like, I like the idea. And here I am doing this on the table, figuring out where the beats were and where the pause should go. He's like, "Yeah, no, you're right about where the pause should go." And I'm paraphrasing here. "You're right about where the pause should go, but it should be one bar." I was like, "Really?" So check out mine versus Jordan's for these two measures. Here's mine.
No one knows. Sometimes.
So mine just kind of keeps thundering ahead, and that's cool in its own right. But this pause brings this thing in where the dynamics just start slamming us. And this is why I like this John's point of view so much.
No one knows. Sometimes.
Okay, that's a different thing, right? That's extremely cool. And this was going into this part with a da na 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 na. And what's funny about day one is, like I said, I wasn't in it for flattery or anything like that. There were people who they were in the bathroom and they're kind of peeing, and you could hear the peeing, but they're like whistling. Doo, 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 doo. I don't know how to whistle, so they're like doo, 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 doo. And I was like, "You're kidding me," right? Because I wanted something distinct for the song, but there wasn't a singular part that kind of brought it together. And it's interesting that people kind of latched onto it. And on day two, with one of our colleagues, they did other stuff, which, again, due to copyright strike, I'm not going to repeat whistling or humming or whatever. They did something equally as cool that people kind of latched onto. So that's the first part. The second part I really like about this, if we compare A and B, again, this comes down to edits. Let's listen to Jordan's. And I'm just going to play these like 3-4 measures here.
Understand that no one knows. Sometimes.
There's a very significant difference between what I did and what Jordan did. And let's pay attention to the drums and the guitars. The drums are massively tight, and he was like, "Yeah, Nate, I'll do half the edits just to get this done." I paraphrase. I'm going to do the second half of edits in Pro Tools. I'm using Studio One just because it's on this computer right here, and the edits he made were so significant that the drums suddenly just start popping out. He made some edits around bass as well just to get them to tuck in. But the guitar is interesting because I wasn't unhappy with the performance. I wasn't unhappy with the tone. For what it's worth, I use Quad Cortex now. I happen to really like it. But when I laid this down in November of 2023, I was using THU plugin. I like the THU series, but at the same time, it's a different energy than the Quad Cortex. So the first part here is the drums are really tight, but I had been using a chain pretty much exclusively doing reductive EQ. I was using the Slate Infinity EQ and then Waves SSL with the guitars. What Jordan did was interesting. And if you're interested in having me kind of reproduce the chains that were used in the session, I'm happy to do that. What Jordan did was he used Waves SSL, which is fine, which is amazing. He did not use compression on the SSL at all. Then he brought in the Waves CLA 3A, so the L3A. And it brought this completely different energy to the guitars where I think he aimed for like 5 dB of reduction. And another thing he did in front of the Waves SSL, so the chain is subtractive EQ, Waves SSL, and 3A. He did some subtractive EQs in the 3K, 4K range in very narrow bands and just cutting out a couple dB. Suddenly the guitars came into focus. So if you look at mine versus Jordan's, I'm just going to play the same bars. Let's listen to that.
Understand that no one knows.
I don't think mine is bad, but I don't think it's also tight. And so what I kept hearing throughout the song was that what he had done was just very specific and useful.
Understand that no one knows.
So here's what I mean. I'm not going to really dig into the frequencies for this because I want to keep this, at a reasonable length. The mid-range in the mix is excellent in Jordan's mix. And like you listen to mine, it's like the reverse of the record I showed you earlier. It's just kind of there, right?
Understand that no one knows.
And also I made, given the way the kick drum was broadcasting, I kind of worked with fundamental things to cut out maybe 130 to 150 because that was abrasive and annoying. And I went the basketball route, and I think it was like 3.2 to 3.5 in the original mix that I boosted, and then the magic of SSL and 8K and the shelf and all that. And it sounded okay, but I also did a massive cut around 500 in the kick, and because I felt it sounded like shit. But again, Jordan is correct whenever he says don't mix and solo too much, and he's right. And one of the things I've been doing, and you can hear the clear night and day between his mix and mine, is that you look at this is all fatness, right? Some of this is caused by using some kind of mastering plugin, and I'd probably make a different choice. And again, not harshing on Jordan, it's just the way I hear the music and perceive it. The guitar tone is a completely different animal in his mix and mine. And another thing here around his mix comes in right after that pause is the lead guitar. So here's mine.
Sometimes I bleed.
So around Jordan's, around mine, I want people like, yeah, you should have just put it in both channels. I'm like, yeah, but it's not your song though. And there's a way I heard it, and I'm not trying to be flinty or a jerk off about it, but there's a way I wanted this song to be, and I just got stuck in bringing it closer to completion. I really wanted that lead to be in the right channel, and I didn't bring in the multi-track for this, as I said. I wanted the right channel, the lead guitar in the right channel to be very specific. So what Jordan did, though, is more interesting. And let's play through that.
Sometimes I bleed.
Now you're like, wait, did he make it louder? What did he do with it? He literally did not make it louder. I was sitting there, right? A bunch of us were sitting there. The left and right guitars, the don't, are effectively the same volume. But what he did was very strategic, specific cuts of that lead guitar on the right. So you get this fatness. So like you keep the fatness of the guitar, you keep the mid range as well. And then he rolled off a bunch of stuff in the lead because you don't need it. So here, once again, here's what you have.
Sometimes I bleed. I look.
Very cool. Vocals. That's my final thing I want to talk about before I call it a day and put this up. Vocals are very, very interesting. So I admit my singing sucks. I hate it. Let me take a quick drink of water here. I hate my singing, but again, I'm a person who's very specific about what they want to do to my own detriment, probably at times, if not at all times, is that vocals for me were this thing that I wanted to tuck in. I didn't want them to be loud and in your face. Jordan brought a different energy to it. I want to kind of do this. So loop through this a little bit and yeah, let's make that happen. Okay. We'll do like 4 measures. So here is mine.
Understand that no one knows. Some understand that no.
So what's going on in the background here, which is not well showcased, and this is one of my favorite parts of what Jordan did was, yeah, I used a chain with 3 things. Subtractive EQ, Waves SSL, and then I use the CA76, so the 1176 modeling or emulation, where the vocals kind of come to the front, but at the same time, they're really uninteresting. I used Melodin or Melodyne, as some would call it, to create a vocal harmony. And the vocals have a little bit of delay, a little bit of reverb, like a tape slap and a small room reverb, but they don't appear that way because I didn't treat them well. When I studied what Jordan did, I'm like, okay, this is a completely different situation, and I'll talk through that in a second.
Understand that no one knows. Some understand that.
So, yeah, it's a different energy. They're still up front, but they're very, very clear. And another thing that took place here is Jordan did vocal edits. Vocals, again, have dogged me for a long time. As someone who performs, vocals for better or for worse, I have my own view of it. But yeah, he did a ton of timing correction, and suddenly they're tight with the mix. So if you compare the A-B mix, like you try to get them exactly on the grid, they're not there anymore because he made good choices with editing when this was mixed. But different energy, more pronounced reverb, different EQing in and out. And what's also interesting with this is in the front half of the song, he's like, hey, let's go lo-fi. Because my original one, I didn't attend. Like I said, the song is simple in arrangement. I didn't do anything to really enhance the vocals. All I did was the vocals were there. And that's a problem with my own, there's my own misgivings. And I'll be the first to tell you that. So the vocals were very boring, like everything else in the song. And Jordan's like, yeah, let's do this front end kind of lo-fi. So let's listen to that and let's go into another part after that where they start opening up a little bit. This is the lo-fi rendition.
Understand that no one knows. Sometimes.
Great. Let's find another part here.
I feel whole.
There it is. Okay, so the vocals start opening up here, and I'll play you the A B, but these are Jordan's once again, or these are Jordan's once again. These are mine, and it brings a completely different energy because by doing strategic things with maybe EQ and saturation or whatever else, it's a completely different energy and brings a completely different dimension to the song.
I feel hopeless with the shape of my own sadness, and it haunts me, a darkening cloud. Yeah, that's reality. Sometimes I call cloud. Yeah, that's reality. Sometimes.
So, as I mentioned, breaking up the vocals, mine are very linear and they're very same. And again, for a song with so very little variance, this is a problem. So what we did here, this came from the room. People are like, look, I think we should do this, and I was just listening at this point because I was like, WTF? How to make this more exciting? I was totally on board with the pause earlier on. I was totally on board with the lo-fi early on, but with this, I'm like, what the hell do I do with this? And someone's like, hey, why don't we just add some delay and do whatnot? I'm like, great. So there are these interesting echoes that take place here that bring, in my view, a nice vibe to this. And this will be the last thing before we call it a day. All right, that's really, really cool. You hear the echo on the tail of these notes. Let's play it again. And let's go back to my original because that's boring as AF, as I said. Yeah, it's a different thing. So to close out today, I appreciate you watching. Once again, I'm Nate Patwarden. I got this really unique opportunity to spend a couple days with Jordan and some real special folks. And this is one for the ages. And I'm going to keep working on this at some point. I'll share it with the team if you're interested, like the group of folks if you're interested, and with YouTube as to how I found what I really liked about what Jordan did and how I hear it differently now that I've spent these 2 days of time. But honestly, if you make hard rock, metal, and you want a really great person to work with, I say this in earnest. Talk to Jordan, take a session with him. Have a great day, everyone.